I grew up in a family where love and support felt like luxuries I was never given. As a child, I didn't just battle epilepsy. I fought against the crushing weight of rejection and stigma right within my own home. My parents, the very people I should have counted on for love, treated me like a burden, an oddity they could barely tolerate. I still remember those moments when I walked into a room and the air changed. Conversation stopped. It was like I was invisible or worse, unwelcome. At 14, after years of hidden pain, I did something my parents called unforgivable. I got expelled from school, and they responded by locking me away, then pushing me out of our home to live with my grandmother. She was the only one who ever made me feel seen, the only person who truly cared that I was more than my diagnoses. But beneath that tough exterior was a soul shattered from years of neglect, desperate for love and acceptance. Before starting, please drop a comment below. Let us know which city you're watching from. Enjoy the video. This story isn't just about betrayal and heartbreak. It's about the long journey toward healing, growth through brokenness, and the choice to reclaim my life. Join me as I peel back the layers of my past to reveal why, after my parents came knocking years later asking for my help and my inheritance, I stood firm with just one condition. This is my story of resilience, self-worth, and the difficult lesson I had to teach those who abandoned me about pride and forgiveness. From as early as I can remember, there was always this growing divide in my family, the invisible line that separated me from my parents and from the kind of love I saw them give my older brother. It started subtly, almost like a shadow creeping in the background of my life. When I was about 6, I noticed the way their eyes would soften for him. Their voices would warm when they spoke to him. But whenever I was around, the lights seemed to dim. Conversations would hush abruptly, and their smiles felt forced, like they were just tolerating my presence rather than welcoming it. I learned quickly that I was different, not just because of the epilepsy that had been diagnosed in my early childhood, but because I was treated like a burden, an uncomfortable truth my parents were unwilling to face. My brother, 3 years older and normal in their eyes, was the child they praised and cheered for, while I felt like the mistake they regretted. That realization was a cold, sharp blade cutting through the innocence of childhood. At school, these feelings followed me. Sometimes, I'd hear kids whisper behind my back, cruelly calling me a freak, words I had no defense against. But the real hurt came from home. Those words echoed there too. Once, my mom muttered under her breath that she wished I'd never been born, a phrase too harsh for any child to bear. My dad avoided looking at me directly, like I was a storm on the horizon he couldn't weather. I was left to navigate the chaos of my medical conditions while trying to make sense of why the two people who were supposed to protect me made me feel so unwelcome. I remember nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart breaking silently as I tried to understand how love could be so conditional, so fragile. My grandmother was a rare bright spot in those dark days. Whenever I visited her, there was an unspoken understanding in her gentle gaze, a warmth that told me I was not alone, that I was still worthy of love. Yet, even her support was tempered by the reality that she was an older woman with limits, and I was becoming a weight too heavy for her to carry alone. These tangled emotions, confusion, sorrow, anger, formed the foundation of my youth. The pain of being unwanted did more damage than any illness ever could. And as I drifted further from the light of my parents' affection, I braced myself for the inevitable breaking point. That breaking point came with all the force of a storm, leading me down a path that would change everything. But before I dive into that, I want you to truly understand the gravity of what it means to grow up feeling so profoundly alone in a place that's supposed to be a safe haven. When you grow up feeling invisible, being ignored by the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, something inside you begins to break. That was my reality. I was a kid burdened not just by epilepsy, dyslexia, and severe ADHD, but by a heartbreaking truth. I was unseen, unheard, and unloved by my own parents. Their indifference wasn't just neglect. It was like a constant cold wind pushing me further into isolation. As I entered my teenage years, the loneliness and despair twisted into anger, a wild, desperate fire burning inside me. I didn't know how else to make them notice me, how else to make them care. I started acting out. At school, I stopped trying. Grades meant nothing when no one at home cared if I succeeded or failed. If I could shock them, if I could be loud enough to force their attention, maybe then they'd see me. I remember the first time I threw a tantrum at home. I screamed until my voice cracked. I slammed doors. I did everything I could to break through the wall of silence they'd built around me. But even then, their response was icy. They rolled their eyes, whispered about me having fits, and told me to be normal. Those words weren't just dismissive. They were a slap across my face. My brother watched all this unfold. Sometimes he looked away. Other times his eyes filled with a quiet sadness I couldn't fully understand. He was the golden child, the easy one. Yet even he seemed trapped in his own helplessness, caught between loyalty to our parents and a silent sympathy for me. He was an important shadow in my life, never speaking up for me, but never actively hurting me either. School authorities started calling my parents more and more often. Each call was a silent plea for help, for intervention. But each time, the answer was the same: a sigh, a shrug, a disappointed glance, and then no real action. I was told I was off the rails, but no one asked why. No one tried to reach the part of me that was hurting. That growing storm inside me culminated on a day I can never forget. It was the day I decided to cross the line, smoking a cigarette in the middle of class, flipping off my teacher. That moment was a scream, a primal, painful cry that said, "I am here. I exist." But instead of getting help or understanding, I was met with fury. The consequences were harsh expulsion, harsh words, and the final cut from my parents. What stung the most wasn't the punishment, but the words they said after. They called me psychotic, a burden, a mistake they regretted having. Their disappointment wasn't hidden anymore. It was a brutal, raw blow to a fragile soul. For the first time, they openly wished I'd never been born. Through all this chaos, my grandmother remained a quiet refuge. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't pretend life was easy. But she saw me, really saw me, in all my mess and confusion. Her words, though sometimes tinged with worry, were like patches on torn fabric, slowly mending parts of me I thought were irreparable. In this whirlwind of rebellion and rejection, I learned something painful and profound. Sometimes, to be seen, you have to break. But what comes after that breaking is what defines you. The day my life cracked wide open didn't come with a warning or a sign. It came as a brutal, cold blow. I've been spiraling, lost in a storm of anger and hurt, but I still clung to a flicker of hope that somehow my parents would see me, maybe even forgive me. That hope shattered the moment they stood before me and told me to pack my things. My hands trembled as I shoved my few belongings into worn-out bags, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief. My brother and mother packed silently, their faces unreadable, while my father's eyes avoided mine. We drove in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the car. When we arrived at my grandmother's house, my chest tightened. I thought this might be temporary, just a time to cool off, a chance for them to realize their mistakes. But the truth hit like a stab. I was being dumped. My parents didn't want me anymore. Their words were sharper than any wound. I was a freak, a burden dragging the family down. My brother, perfect, normal, was the child they truly wanted. Hearing them use the same cruel language that bullies at school used to isolate me was a devastating betrayal. The people who were supposed to protect me were the worst bullies of all. My grandmother's house, once a refuge filled with warmth, suddenly felt like a battlefield. She was older, tired, uncertain. I could see in her eyes the conflict, love for me, but doubts about her strength to take me in. For a week, she held back, wrestling with the enormity of what taking me on would mean. Her hesitation sliced through me, a new kind of pain, fear that even the one person I trusted might turn away. But in the quiet moments, she showed me something else: honesty. She admitted she wasn't ready, that she hadn't expected this, but she saw the truth behind my anger and struggles. She saw the damage caused not by my illnesses, but by the people who were supposed to nurture me. That honesty, raw and imperfect, became the foundation of a fragile new start. I can't say I forgave her for not stepping in sooner, but I did forgive her in that moment. Life had forced her hand, just as it had broken mine. And there, amidst the uncertainty, I made a choice to stop begging for love from those who never truly had it to give, and to build a life where I could be seen and accepted for who I was. My brother, the quiet observer, continued watching from the sidelines, never fully understanding the chasm growing between us, never stepping in to bridge it. His silence was another kind of loneliness, one that only added to the complexity of my pain. This moment was more than abandonment. It was a reckoning, a harsh unveiling of truth that forced me to face not just who my parents were, but who I needed to become. Leaving my parents' home behind was like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. But in the midst of that terrifying fall, my grandmother was waiting, steady, patient, and unexpectedly fierce in her determination to help me survive. She didn't promise it would be easy. In fact, she was honest about every worry she had. She was aging, tired, and unsure if she could handle the whirlwind of troubles I carried with me. But despite her fears, she chose to stand by my side, and that choice became my lifeline. The first few weeks were a test for both of us. I was still raw from the wounds my parents had inflicted. Anger and mistrust bubbled near the surface. I doubted if I deserved her kindness, and sometimes I acted out, testing her limits just like I had with my parents. But she never gave up. She met my rebellion with quiet strength, her love wrapped in steady hands and clear eyes that saw my pain without judgment. She arranged for tutors who understood my dyslexia and ADHD, not as excuses, but as challenges we could face together. For the first time, school wasn't a battlefield. It was a place where I could grow, where I could imagine a future beyond survival. She enrolled me in a private school where teachers were patient and accommodating. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I could learn at my own pace, make mistakes, and still be accepted. Yet, the real transformation was not just academic. It was in the sense of safety and belonging I finally felt under her roof. Nights no longer echoed with silence and coldness, but with the warmth of a grandmother's love. Imperfect, sometimes worried, but always unwavering. She didn't erase the past, but she helped me build a foundation for a new beginning. My brother's visits became rare and distant, a silent reminder of the family I had lost but was learning to live without. The emotional scars from my parents' rejection did not disappear overnight, but with each passing day, with each small victory, I stitched myself back together. Grandmother was more than a caretaker. She became my coach, my fierce protector, the steady voice in my storm. She confronted my parents when they tried to interfere, defending me fiercely and demanding respect for the progress I was making. Her boldness in standing up to them gave me courage I never knew I had. This journey, full of setbacks and small triumphs, taught me something powerful. Growth isn't about erasing the darkness, but about learning to carry the light, no matter how faint. Years had passed since the storm of my teenage years. Years I spent rebuilding my life piece by piece, fortified by my grandmother's unwavering support. But just as I thought the past was finally behind me, it came rushing back in the form of my parents, unexpected, unwelcome, and demanding. They showed up at my doorstep not with apologies or regrets, but with urgent pleas for money. Money they said my brother needed to fix his life. The very brother they had always favored, now in deep trouble. And suddenly, I was thrown into the role of the savior. After all I'd endured, after being abandoned and called names that still haunted me, they wanted help. Not quietly, not respectfully, but boldly, as if the years of silence and hurt meant nothing. Inside, my emotions roiled. Anger, disbelief, a flicker of sympathy for my brother, and a deep, defensive wall rising to protect the fragile peace I had fought so hard to build. As I listened, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and old wounds that refused to heal. I laid down a condition, one they never expected, and one that shook them to their core. If they wanted any help from me, they had to publicly acknowledge the pain they caused. They had to admit the cruel words, the neglect, the way they treated not only me, but also my grandmother. They had to own their mistakes, not in hushed whispers behind closed doors, but where everyone could see. Only then would I consider sharing what was rightfully mine. Their shock was immediate. Faces drained of color, voices trembling as they insisted I was being unreasonable, selfish, words that betrayed their own guilt more than mine. But I stood firm. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, accountability, and finally breaking the silence that had suffocated me for so long. My brother appeared, a shadow of the boy I once knew, lost, fragile, and caught in the crossfire of family pride. They tried to use him as a pawn, sending me pictures of his decline, hoping to soften my resolve. But all I saw was the consequence of their neglect, and every plea only strengthened my determination. In this confrontation, I wasn't just defending my inheritance. I was defending my identity, my dignity, and the hard-won freedom that came from refusing to accept less than I deserved. This standoff marked a new chapter. It forced all of us to confront the fractures in our family, the pain buried beneath years of silence, and the cost of pride left unchecked. After the final confrontation, everything felt fragile, like walking on a thread stretched tight between past wounds and future hopes. The weight of years of pain and betrayal hadn't vanished. It had simply settled into the corners of my mind, waiting to be faced each day with every breath I took. But I was different now. I wasn't the broken child left at my grandmother's doorstep. I was someone who had fought through the darkness and found sparks of light within myself. The loss of my grandmother, the one person who had been my anchor, was a deep, jagged ache. It felt like losing the last piece of my sanctuary. But even in grief, I found a strange strength, a call to live not just for survival, but with purpose. She had taught me that love could be fierce and imperfect, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that setting boundaries was not betrayal, but self-respect. I took control in ways I never thought possible. I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, a fresh start where my past couldn't catch up to me so easily. I made it clear to my extended family and anyone who would listen, my boundaries were firm. My parents, the very people who had refused to accept me for years, no longer had access to my life. Blocked from my phone, my social media, my home, I reclaimed my peace by cutting off the toxic ties that had held me back. But freedom wasn't just about shutting doors. It was about healing the internal scars. I sought therapy to untangle the web of emotions that had once threatened to consume me. I confronted my anger, my grief, and the lingering echoes of rejection. Piece by piece, I rebuilt my identity, not defined by my past, but shaped by my resilience. In this journey, my brother became a complicated figure. I felt sympathy for his struggles, but also a sense of distance. Knowing that family ties could be complex and imperfect, I realized that love doesn't always mean proximity or approval. Sometimes it's about letting go and allowing everyone the space they need, whether to heal or to stumble. Looking back, I understood that life isn't about perfect relationships or fairy tale endings. It's about choosing what and who you allow to occupy your heart and your time. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. This story, my story, is far from over. It's a testament to the power of self-worth, the courage to face pain head-on, and the hope that every ending can be a new beginning. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, or if you faced your own battles, please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us all. Healing and freedom are within reach, no matter the past. This is not just my journey, it's ours. And together, we move forward, stronger, wiser, free.